Okay, guys, good morning, everyone. Today I have the pleasure to introduce you Dr. Edoardo CavalieriDOro. Dr. CavalieriDOro is head of the CBRN unit, an advanced regional unit of the Lombardy region in Italy. And of the Department of the Italian Firefighters. So today he will be with us for 2 hours, and he will give a lecture on how to respond to severe emergencies with the support of mobile laboratories. Leave you the floor, Eduardo, and thank you.
Thank you very much. So good morning, everybody. Okay, so as we said, today's lecture is about severe emergency with the support of mobile laboratories. This lecture is mostly focused on biological aspects. Despite my background is in nuclear engineering, it came out that after the COVID-19 crisis, the consequence of a response in biological response that we gave as firefighters, I came out to be like a little bit specialized in biological things. So usually I come to have lectures here at the university in this field. Well, this is more or less, there's some modifications, but this is the agenda, the outline of today's lecture. We will focus on the objectives and of having mobile labs on the field in operations. Then we will look at the various equipments of mobile labs, which are the design metrics if you want to design a new mobile laboratory, and then we have some examples. We will go through some examples. Of course, it's a 2-hour lecture, so not that long, a lot of contents, but please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, any time. Smart questions, even not smart questions are fine. And so on. Well, first of all, I don't think I have to explain what is a mobile laboratory. We will go through the definitions throughout the lecture. But obviously, the point here is that while there's a lot of reference knowledge, standards, if you want in the design of a physical laboratory, like in a building, for mobile labs, there's not too much in the literature. And so these two references are almost everything we have in terms of literature. So there's a guidance which is very popular of the WHO, but not going into the details. We will have some slides about it, but there's not that much. And so mostly, at least in our organization, the design of mobile laboratories comes from experience. We designed the first laboratories in 2000, I think there was 6, I don't remember if when there were the Olympics in Torino or after, more or less that was the incipit, let's say, of our experience with mobile labs. So the Italian firefighters have mobile labs, but of course many other organizations are adopting mobile labs. So if you look at this picture, you can see obviously the red one is our laboratory, one of our laboratories, but you can see that there are also obviously military applications in the civilian field or other organizations. So for instance, September of last year, we signed a protocol with the agency, the border agency, customs. I don't know how to say the Agenzia Dogane e Monopolio, and they have a lab, for instance, which is a chemical laboratory to see if stomach crack bringing gasoline, you want to see if the gasoline was diluted, was pure, was manipulated, and so on. Then environmental agencies also have their mobile labs, and then many other. Let's see also mobile truck from the RFA, which is like the train, the company managing the train infrastructure in Italy. Or that one is Istituto Superiore di Sanità, so it's well, so there are many possible application of a mobile laboratory. Obviously, environmental sampling usually is the focus, but as we saw in this example, not just that. Then, if you are designing a laboratory, the first thing you can think of is to build it in a structure, but it can be either a physical structure like a container, or as you see on the left, as a tank. So, for instance, this picture is comparing two biological laboratories. One is the one we have in the first services in Milan, which is a container with expandable an expandable volume, so ISO 20 with expandable space, or a tent. So this is the biological laboratory from BeLife, which is a Belgian civil protection sanitary service, also offering mostly the same capacity, but obviously with a different idea. But it's clear that designing a container is harder for some reasons, but it's more secure, more safe than designing the same infrastructure with a tank. Well, so let me just step back. If you didn't see this yet, this is the civil protection system in Europe. So basically, the civil protection system in Europe is based upon a mechanism which is being amended just this year, but started in 2013. And the idea is that all the member states, plus a series of participating states, is offering capacities in order to respond to emergencies. And so every organization within a member state in Europe or not, because you see that also Turkey now, there's Ukraine, so we have several additional states to the ones composing the EU, can offer their capacities, civil protection capacities in such a way that they can respond to emergencies. Whatever you have a disaster have in place in Europe or elsewhere, possibly in the area, in the Mediterranean area or close to that. Otherwise, it would be very, far and tough to reach on time. And so I was emphasizing in this slide, which is not very recent, because you can see that. What is this? Okay, but you can see that this. 2021, so it's 2 years ago. But I pick up this slide because at that time, the CBRN capacities, which are the gray icons, offered by member states were not that many, but considerable number. And in addition to that, there were 2 countries that were also offering mobile labs capacities. Okay. And so this means that potentially in a broad framework like the ones that we are seeing here, which is like an aggregation of potential capacities that range from urban search and rescue or high capacity pumping in the case of flood and so on. There are also CBRN, and in addition to CBRN, we have the mobile labs, which are potentially linked to or CBRN capacity or to sanitary medical capacities. Okay. Okay. So now, given that, I mean, we made this introduction because we see later on how Italy how the Italian Fire Corps is participating to this framework. Well, this slide wants to summarize a little bit when we started a new project a couple of years ago. And we were asked, actually, we proposed ourselves to design new CPRN capacities, including new mobile labs. And so we started from scratch, rethinking how would we, what are the metrics that we have to follow when we design a new vehicle or a new piece of capacity, if you want. And so, yeah, so one first choice is to think about how it's going to look like. What's going to be a container, a truck, a tent. But obviously, when you pick up this decision, the bigger the safer if you want the box where you're going to put this laboratory is going to be. Obviously, more complex. It's going to be even more complex to have a logistic, because the logistic implies that if you get a truck, then you have a very high private slicing, then you have to be careful about operation and utilization. And then we will see later on that in our organization we took the choice to have a very big trust, because we thought that one of the key points that we have, even with some weaknesses, is to have a lot of drivers. Not so many organizations have so many high-level drivers embedded in the organization. And so this was, even though I'm speaking with a colleague of mine there, we know that this is also a weak point in these days, because our guys, our handlers, new firefighters are afraid, scared a little bit to drive big trucks in emergency situation. But it's just hopefully a temporary problem. Then, so you have to know, first of all, this the logistic, the type of the design type. Then you have to be aware, of course, to the scenarios you can respond, and so that's why we saw this map before, because the scenarios are the scenarios, the multiple ones, just are the fact that a mobile lab can be deployed outside of your country. Then you have to decide also who is running, of course, who are going to be the guys running these labs in all terms, logistically and technically. And then, yeah, you have to know also what are the requirements of your mission. How much time do you have to deploy your laboratory? How fast, how quickly it has to be engaged once you reach the mission, and so on. Okay, so this is a slide that I used very often to remind us that when we talk about scenarios, CBRN scenarios portfolio is huge potentially, because we have always to think of once we have the one event that is a CBRN event. First of all, you have to ask yourself how it started. It was a random accident, or it was some malicious event, some perpetrator or bad guy causing it. We have a distinction in Italy, but maybe you know well, I don't know, like which kind of tricky, which is what we call civil defense in those scenarios that are caused by a terrorist, for instance, and the domain of civil protection is the ones that are accidental. In reality, this doesn't change that much in terms of operations, meaning that in Italy, even though we have this distinction, doesn't matter in terms of operation. Italian Fire and Rescue Services are heading and coordinating the scenarios, no matter what. This is one of these, no matter, regardless of this distinction. But then in other countries, this could have a big impact, not only possible guy or was random access. Then you have to wonder, it's a conceptual, obviously, diagram. So you have to ask yourself, so whatever it happens, this event, we were preparing to it, we were ready, with a proper preparedness to it. We are in the response phase, or we are even able to focus on the recovery phase. So, well, let's say that we stay here, but today we are just talking to respond. But of course, if we design a laboratory, obviously we are always in the preparation phase. So as we saw, some of the metrics implies to know how long the script is deploying on the field, and so on. But let's say then that you have an accident, you have to ask yourself what type of accident is that, between CP, R, or N. But then in each one of those categories, you have to try to define some sort of the impact you expect based on the information that you have. Okay, so for instance, in the field of radiological, by looking at what the International Atomic Energy Agency guidelines are, you usually decide that you can measure the impact by knowing what is the activity of the radiological sources involved. For instance, while of course, if you are in the biological, what you look at is the type of agent. It's in class A, B, C, or 3, depending if you want to adopt the European or the Anglo-Saxon classification. But once you have some idea of the severity, you have to know that also the severity is, or how complex the scenario could be, depends on the way the dispersion. So how is this chemical or biological or radiological agent dispersed in the environment? So you have to know the diffusion model, let's say. It's a spray, it's an explosion, it's dispersed through a fire. So once you, and by the way, answering to all those questions when an accident occurs, it's not that easy. So many informations are getting collected over time, but for sure, while you collect or you reduce the uncertainty of the information you're acquiring about where are you at in this event-free diagram, if you want, you have to remind that in the meantime, you have to plan your emergency in such a way that you are going to protect the population first, but then the environment, the infrastructures, and let's say that these are priorities, and maybe you can also try to mitigate the economic losses that you have generated by whatever the tsunamis you're considering here. Okay, well, do you have any questions up to now? Any comments? Everything is clear? Okay, good. Sure. Yeah, like what?
There are only for closing travel even the connection.
No, just for simplification, I took a path and I just described what would be the impact for radiological, but then as you see in the next one, if I pick up the chemical, for instance, it explodes because the chemical probably the severity or the metrics of which we measure the potential impact are many, like you should have like an inflammable gas, an inflammable liquid, I don't know, oxidants, corrosion, and so while
Any combination
yeah, so potentially creating the entire diagram gives you so many options. So but here, yes, this one was made just to answer your questions. So this can be expanded, and expanded. But then this is a way to help yourself to conceptualize how difficult it is to determine and portray, if you want, a severe scenario. There's different levels of questions to answer yourself, and then you come out and say, okay, we are in this scenario. And then one of the actions that we can start doing is responding to that scenario with a mobile laboratory. So here is a classification, in fact, the idea of defining not all the possible ways we can expand that diagram. Here in these scenarios, the ones on the left are civil defense scenario, and these are taken from the guidelines that were published by the Ministry of Defense in 2022. While on the right, there are the twins, if you want, of these scenarios in civil protection, meaning random versus post-time. And so maybe you try to have a broad classification of the scenarios, to have a map, and then for each of those, then you maybe should ask yourself, okay, what is the type of dispersion of these radiological agents? So, I don't know, you have a dirty bomb, and then you ask yourself the questions, where are we at now? We are in the response phase. And so what was caused by a perpetrator or by a random accident, and so on. And so you ask the way the jump bomb and the dispersion in the environment, and somehow we protect the population, and what do we do? And one of the things that of the answer to the question, what do we do, is to use mobile laboratories. So, of course, I don't know if you know, we'll see later on the acronym DSIM, which stands for Detection, Sampling, Identification, and Monitoring. And so these are the typical actions that you can do as a response to a severe event. And of course, in this acronym, identification is the function that offer mobile labs, that are offering mobile labs. So with mobile labs, you can do identification of your agents. While with detection, you can maybe detect the product family, respond to the fact that you know what is the risk that you're facing on the field at the time, and so. But it's not giving you the name, last name, and a graphic if you want of your agent. And so, given that, why? Of course, if we have a fixed laboratory, so it means that we have a laboratory which is inside a building. Of course, it's obvious to realize that in that case, a fixed laboratory has more features, if you want, that offers more functionalities than having a mobile lab. So the objective of a mobile lab is to optimize, if you want, the features that are offered by a laboratory which is then embedded in a building. And so these are obviously some differences you might have. One very simple difference is that if you're in a building and you want to have water, you have a pipeline which is bringing you water. You cannot have it, it's picking out water. While if you are having a system like this, you have a tank, or maybe you have a system that connected with pipes, with infrastructure. So obviously, just by this example, in terms of sustainability, you have to design something that is offering the same services, if you want, but knowing that you have a lot of limitations that are in size, and then if you want also in weight, because now you have to, given a volume, you have to try. I don't know, if you create a mobile laboratory that is a radiological laboratory, then you shield everything with lead, then this container is going to be small, but it's going to, weight a lot. So how we will deploy it on the field, the mobilization is going to be tough. Maybe you can be done a truck, but still, it could be a problem. And so, of course, if the space is constrained, also the number of people working inside it is constrained. So obviously, there are a lot of things that you have to think in order to optimize your space inside that lab in such a way that it's going to be, let's say, comfortable, usable. And of course, you have also to think what type of operations you want to do here. It's just a single sampling from the environment, or it's maybe it's like a supply chain of samples, like as it could be. Let's do some swaps to the population and have hundreds or thousands of analysis that we run in a PCR at the same time. And then this means that people stay longer, then it means that the air conditioning system has to run for longer, and then it has to be changing replacement for filters. So there are a lot of implications, of course, in thinking what the difference is between a fixed and a mobile lab. Any questions about this or any comments?
The management of the waste of the lab. And made inside or outside of the mobile?
Well, there are, for instance, now we are designing 4 labs in this very moment. And for instance, in the radiological labs, we have a shielded container lab inside, but then we are also thinking that if the shielding, we can build that container with a certain weight. And so we went up deciding that 50 kilograms is the maximum that we can manage. Otherwise, we have to move them out and of course transfer them before operations, before you demobilize your fleet, but you leave the place. With the biological lab, it is easier because you have a lot of systems that can neutralize your wastes inside the lab. Like you can have autoclave, you can have H2O2, you can have systems so that you put them in a box and that's something that was biological waste, you can store waste. Maybe not legally, but at least in terms of risk and effectiveness. So yeah, but usually this is not a big problem like the solid wastes. It's more the liquid. I mean, but the operations in the lab implies that you have some water and you have to wash something like the collection, the tank collecting that. But still, the most difficult case also in regulatory terms is the radiological.
But this influences the choice of the typology of instrument. Right? For example, if I need a lot of solvent to perform some analysis with a specific technique,
yes,
probably it should be not preferable respect to another techniques that use less solvent, for example.
As you will see later on, if I'm able to arrive to that slide, because there are many slides, we decided to build big labs. So now our labs switched from a 20-feet container to a 40-feet container. Because overall, if you think about all the implications of things like the ones we are describing here, at the very end, it doesn't make any sense to create a small lab with small, all the small features, but small size. Like to give an examples, yes, in the chemical labs, which is a 40-feet container, we have a cabinet which is containing all the solvents and all the chemicals that are used to manipulate your agent. So those are not wasted, but are chemicals stocked there. Plus, then if you do those manipulations, you have to design your glove box in such a way that you keep into account these reactions inside the glove box. Plus, you have to take into account what vapors could be generated by some chemical reactions. You have the extraction system. So, if you keep going with all this reasoning, at the end, we opted for what was the bigger volume, even though, of course, the bigger volume has implications in logistics, as we said. And for that reason, I think we are designing the first I don't want to say worldwide, but one of the first that I know, container designed in aluminum and not iron. Reduce the weight. And so, of course, then this more complex to build up, but that's knowledge area. So, the pictures here to show you. We have already built the container structure. Okay, given that, I just want to remind in the theater of operations where the mobile laboratory can be deployed. Where can be deployed? Red, orange, yellow, green, where? For you, where would you position? Locate a mobile laboratory. This diagram. Yellow. Okay, I don't know if you are at one point of the masters you are at. I mean, if you are familiar with this representation, this is
Probably green because you have to stay in the same.
okay. So now it depends from your doctrine. Because if we are now CBRN military are up to now, they designed the mobile laboratories in such a way they could fall into the red zone. Many years ago, my organization took the decision, see, it's not a real decision, but designed our biological laboratories in such a way that they can have either a positive or a negative pressure inside. Someone is telling me the implication of switching the pressure from positive to negative.
So you can throw out the contamination if it's positive, and instead they remain inside.
Okay, so the philosophy in general is that if you are manipulating biological agents, for instance, you keep negative pressure so that you keep inside the lab any potential pressure. And that's the safety feature in general. But then, if the idea is that when you are doing identification, at some point the container, the laboratory, this gets submerged by a fog, like a cloud of agents, then you switch to positive pressure, not to protect the environment, but to protect your operators from the threat that is coming from outside. Plus, if you want the contamination of the lab itself, but mostly for the operators. So we built probably at that point when we made that design choice, we did it because the only doctrine that was existing in CBRN in that time was the military CBRN labs. So the military CBRN labs, that means they are sons of the Cold War period, where the idea was I can be in the middle of, of theater of operations where someone is, throwing chemical agents against my troops, and so I have to defend myself, but continue operations. For us, this is impossible. The firefighters cannot operate like this, and so it cannot be in the red. There was some chance to put it in the yellow, but given that the new fleet that we have designed, we decided to interoperate it with other entities, like civilians, like, I don't know, hospitals, operators, so to interoperate with them inside the lab. We took the choice, but definitely it has to be in the green zone. So it has to be out of the operations, and it doesn't have to be in any way connected or bordered to the zones that have some chance to have a risk difference from zero. And so right now, our choice is definitely to have them same as with the hospital. The water, or as we say in our case, we put it where the base of operation should be, which maybe is the base.
It should be in the middle because I can receive the sample from outside but I have a decontamination area before and
Okay.
also
But the point that it should be, but the point is that this representation is not static in many scenarios. So there's no, the chance that this area from yellow transform into red. But there's a wind change, you know, like, and so we definitely decided that at the end there are there are configurations where you can stay in yellow, because maybe some types of dispersion have no chance to, once everything is deposited on soil, you change the configuration. But right now, we say that if we can, we put them there. The only limitation could be the distance, but not the time, because we want to do that. Okay, so this is a picture taken from an exercise that we did in Lyon, March 2023. Well, this was just us doing some, it was an exercise with our CBRN team and went to get the certification. We had some labs, and so we were doing some thoughts. In fact, where to put these labs. And so if this is the theater of operations, we have the contamination, common paths, temperature detection. We have many things in the yellow zone, but we were opting to have, as we said, the part that is related to what we call base of operation, which is the dam, the place where the troop get rest. And it's outside the boundaries of the scenarios. But with this one, just to show you a diagram that involved thoughts from our team. Okay, so this is just a diagram to remind us how many functions we have to deal with during operations. I will explain it later on. Let me just telling you that we now have a little bit of a focus from now start to focus on biological. Biological operations were very rare up to the COVID-19 crisis, at least for us in terms of first responders. So the pictures you see here were the ones before COVID, which means we had some response, if you want, as fire brigades during the Sierra Leone outbreak, like the Ebola, which means if a patient or a doctor was coming from that area and maybe felt sick, we had to do escort, that is a containment system, so the fleet of vehicles that bring the patient to the hospital. That's this technical system in response to any problem during the transport. This is, I think, the only civil defense exercise ever did in Italy. Biological, that was done in Milan in 2016, and this was a training that we did at Ditch 7 in Taormina a few years ago. Just the first Trump cycle. And here instead, these are some pictures taken from my firehouse. Showing the setup, the initial setup that we did. This was the initial setup we did during the COVID-19 crisis, and this was the final setup. I mean, but we did at the end of the stage, probably a small facility around our labs. So if we want to design laboratory biological labs, we have to remember that the key drivers. We were talking about ergonomics, wastes, duration, quality of the air, and whatever you want, but safety is the first key metrics in the design. So every decision has to come from the safety of the operators, but not only of the operators, and then also comes security measures. So these are the two key drivers in every decision. How big is it? Which type of switch we visit, and so on. And so these are instead pictures of chemical labs that I designed for the 2015. For instance, this laboratory, find a mistake in this laboratory. So we, at the time, thought that having natural light was a good idea, but for some reason in the interaction with the manufacturer, that we came out with a sliding bit, which is not definitely good in a lab. But fortunately, if we want, is that this lab is a chemical lab, which is basically based on our main function, which is just asking yourself if a sample coming from a fire can contain vapors of some accelerator that's gathering. So if you want to inspect if the fires in some places were generated by someone putting on purpose some gas and some fuel. And so this is not the type of environment that has to be very still to work. And you don't have this food, which is pointing exactly the extraction point. So the probability of contamination, even if we take that window open, is not, but this just to show like that. But there's another feature which was, I think, nice, so that you cannot see it here, but we decided that the emergency shower would have been outside the container to save space inside the container. Okay, but these are just the figures showing how it is. So in this case, for instance, the dangers with storage is very small, given the purpose of this laboratory. But the laboratory that we are designing now has a much bigger, like it's literally of storage. The 180 centimeters container for solvents and so on. Okay, so this is just to show you the fact that it is true that a mobile laboratory is designed to be a self-sufficient unit, but this is a little bit not true if we think about, because this is a setup that you see here of other containers of other containers surrounding. So this facility was built during COVID-19 when we decided to do swaps to our personnel. So when you build up such a complex pipeline, which means like hundreds of swaps per day, then it easily come out, but you have to think about things like, okay, where do the operators are going to wash and stay? Here, so you have to need their toilets. Where are going to change before working? Where do you have your logistics? Like, what do you have your consumables? Well, then we were doing some experiments. Then we were needing also. We wanted to do the swap of your person stepping in, to have like an ambulatory or something like this. Then you have to manage the data of all these people, from computers were connected to the sanitary system of the region. And so at the end, they came out what you have to have. If you have a complex system running for months or years, if this was the case, you have to have an environment for each sub-function that is related or which is important in the lab. So if you're doing 3 swaps in a red area, you don't need a place for managing your things. Okay, you need just a simple printer, and you have your code, you are sure that what you're manipulating is identified and so on. But if you have started to have hundreds of analysis, then you will find yourself surrounded by supporting structures. So administrative, sanitary, logistic, and you want safety and the hygiene of the operators. So this is the, we will shortly do a 5 minutes break, but let me show you just, this is the first picture of the mobile labs, biological mobile labs we saw up to now, the red one. This is describing how the space is managed. So as you see, it's a 20 feet, but we gained more space by having an expanding part. And on one side of the expanding part, there's a glove box. On the other one, there's a manipulation actually, that's the space for all your equipment, PCR or similar. So here the detectors, here the manipulation, the safe manipulation, and then that's a central table, which is for the safe manipulation, meaning some biological agent that has been neutralized inside of the bottle. Then you need a filter, a safety shower between the filter and the main room, and then you have the containers and fridges for to contain safely reagents, consumable, and so on. And so that's the way you. But then, of course, you have this room, this space, which is usually something between 15 to 25% in some cases of the total space. Let's say 15 is the average, where you have your supply system, so you have the air conditioning, the filtering, the containers, the reservoir of water. All your subsystems are here, and the system that is creating the positive and the negative part. Okay, with this slide, we will stop. 5 minutes break, and then we get back for the second part. Thank you. I don't know if during the break I have to put here on pause, but yeah.
Yes, boss. Hey, I want to repeat. Diciamo caffè, niente caffè, ma non ce la parli, caffè. No, no, è finito. E nessuno, niente. Adesso, Fammi. Sono da fammi. Scusate.
It's one and five.
Allora. It's like 5 minutes experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Io ho vinto. Sì, ma come? Oh, it's like. It's a very approach. Oh, you don't know.
I think they're bonding. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
okay.
So he's actually my boss.
Okay. Okay, yes, and maybe it's like
Yes.
five. So you see, you're talking, basically, the
So, friends, you work in Geneva.
are you working to keep the values in practice?
Okay, Geneva, here, and then
Okay, like.
it's really close.
Like, move the point.
Yes, yes.
Where about?
Sure. You know, sir? Living is nice. Weather is nice. Hours are beautiful.
The weather is nice. Okay, maybe in 4 years, you're kind of,
Okay, then.
4 years. I mean, like, it's kind of chill, I guess, right? I mean, talking that I
A parte quello, ma poi è una parte certo una questione di io non so orgoglio perché pure la storia diciamo c'è stato un generale del Papa e non c'hanno, cioè io ho provato ho sentito francese, ho detto ma se parlavamo tanto per il modulo che bisogna fare esperienze di curriculum internazionali, ce l'abbiamo in casa, perché non ce lo attiviamo? Cioè, abbiamo le ore che abbiamo, cioè abbiamo le ore. Facciamo le ore delle esercitazioni.
Allora, io c'ero passato riuscito, perché comunque per Paolo Gentile gli avevo detto, quando c'è il motorostima e facciamo un gruppettino, del teatro internazionale. Poi funzionava, aveva una roba che era fondamentale, che era anche in 90. Era io riparazione, senza servizione per mesi. Con un bilico di 13 metri e poi non mi sta il tecnico del principe di collaborazione più comunque mi ero già informato non stava finendo il terzo stacchetto come mai il luogo meno lo mando a fare certo che poi stavo in una sezione ci sarà ci vorrà un po' per calcolare questo si adopera, però è chiaro che lei scrive con quest'ore non la spunta.
Beh, diciamo che se va lei col questore c'è un problema. Cioè, nel senso, perché a Torino io non posso andare con questore da solo. C'è qualche cosa che non fa.
Perché il cavo pensavo che fosse per Paolo Gentile che fosse
Quindi, poco così. Quindi va.
Vabbè,
Adesso parlavano forse qualcosa per capire il gioco. Poi già siamo capiti anche per quello. E credo sia anche per la questione di lo facciamo noi, che ci siamo riusciti a farlo noi, non so, questa cosa un po' che farà una differenza. No, anche perché appunto le risorse erano nostre, cioè indipendenti, mi toccavano manco le cose loro di straordinario che tanto
cioè, anche se un po' di palle il sistema è rapido, io volendo vedo che è fattibile.
Bisogna chiamare direttamente tutti quanti i vari interessati, cioè.
No, perché poi la polemica che è uscita su quando hanno fatto l'esercitazione all'estero, in parte la condivido perché voglio dire, tu tiri fuori il team, voglio dire, di quelli che la vanno a fare, tiri su quel team, va bene, anzitutto di che la procedure e poi fai un follow up, non possono andare tutti. quello che parla veloce per il resto veloce
che sai che fa,
quindi fino a lì tutto ok. Poi il fatto che si sta andando indietro, non abbiamo adesso fuori da 3 giorni, c'è una compagnia di scuola, sono cosa che abbiamo fatto, abbiamo sempre veramente so che è stata data perché non gli stanno in parte più una che sono venuto adesso sono ideologico, che lo fermo bene, ma lì è una lezione dell'università, quanto è stabilita di livello, a tanto punto che per la lezione per la competizione come test exercise, potevamo, che non so se l'abbiamo fatto quanto tempo hai quando fai le cose, il direttore decide di
il problema di fondo sia che da Milano che poteva un pochettino da Roma non hanno accorto e immagino che sia assorbito completamente.
penso che sia proprio quello.
Cioè,
Poi alla fine
loro sono stati, nel senso e poi non credo neanche che magari che sia
io sto carburando dalla mia area,
perché Francesco pure è stato come tutti quanti in contemporanea dirigente, quindi fondamentalmente
l'abilità dell'amministrazione del creare tutti i compiti sembra quasi calcolare.
praticamente quindi il management
C'era una politica che mi ricordava, non è che mi arriva in giro qualcuno che
e quindi è difficile, infatti la vedo difficile però.
comunque siamo adesso continuiamo a portare avanti però è chiaro che
Sì, no, non sicuramente, però sappiamo bene che se non c'è qualcuno a Roma, cioè sicuramente voi cosa fate? E già questo è difficile vedere, non so a Milano, ma a Torino, proprio alla canna del gas come uomini, facciamo i corsi e si presentano, li obblighiamo e si presentano, un delirio.
ok. Io
Ricominciamo.
guys, let's try to sit down, please. Okay. So welcome back. So we saw the design of this laboratory. So how did we manage this laboratory? So these are the data coming from my unit in Milan, which is serving as we said, the region of Lombardy. And so the green bars are year by year the number of samples that we did or analysis. And so it means that, well, first of all, where does this come from? Basically, this comes from the 2001 anthrax attacks. Okay, so basically what we do as fire brigades since that time is most of these green bars, mostly all of them, are analysis to verify the presence of anthrax in our powder. Okay, so it's the famous attack that happened in the United States where envelopes were sent, people opened it up and got contaminated by anthrax. So obviously, since then, this is a false positive event. So no real attack of that type happened afterward. But despite that, all there was like a sort of simulated attacks over the years, at least up to 2020. As you can see, the green bars are the numbers. So it means that in 2014 we had 14 is here 9 attacks of powders contained in an envelope that was sent to this one was this year was sent in Milan to the stock exchange to the president not the president of the republic, the president of the council of the ministries. It was sent to some other politicians. So in their offices was sent an envelope with a tract and with a powder touch was revealed, but with that. And so these green bars means basically the event occurred, was classified as a biological intervention, and after analysis, it was postponed. It was not happening. But as this kept us awake, if you want. And so some I reported the irrelevant events. But then I have to say that, and so the green bars, the darker green bars are exercises that were done over the 3 years. And then there are some, well, then in 2020 up to 2022, our laboratory, as I said, switched to do swaps. So now from 10 interventions, so 10 cases or accidents, if you want, per year, we switched to 15,000 analysis in a couple of years. So this just to say that if you are ready, either in your structure, like the mobile, the technologies, and the people, then you can switch from 10 numbers from 10,000. So when you design a lab, you have to think if the lab can sustain this, different types of the logistics that we saw the diagrams before. So we had also some real events that were basically contamination of the lab. We had a contamination of our command firehouse. We had a contamination of the food, some of the local style within the detection. So we had some real events. One is the contamination of the lab, and the other one is the contamination of our the food services. Then in 2020, in the middle of the COVID crisis, we also had the only one detection of real anthrax in Italy, which was coming from Verona. So in Verona, there was a researcher from a biological lab who retired and then died because she was old. And the sister, when she stepped into the house, found a bottle. Over the top of the bottle, there was written anthrax. Our this is where cold. And from Venice, our colleague sent us the samples, and then we in fact realized it was real anthrax, but it was then done for 10 years or maybe more, and so it was not confessed, but it was a real. But it was a spore of anthrax. Spore of different families of anthrax all combined. It was homeworks from that research. She was bringing her homework home, and she left those homeworks abroad. So she had a very big. There was also some problem. Let me say, improperly, maybe I'm not very right, but I know that the person in charge of the institute in Italy, that is in charge in Italy for doing official diagnosis of anthrax. So it is located in Foggia. It's the zooprophylactic center, and the head of that zooprophylactic center told me that the mixture was particularly manipulated, and so it was not just a pure for overheating family markets, where was some or mixes easy, just piling them up, or even manipulation. So I remember that we expect was twice a day. Can you believe that? Okay, I can believe that. It was there, it was in the bottle. Still, if you think about like putting a bottle here while we are in this room and saying this is anthrax, this that is neutralized, 10 years old, but it means that some safety systems don't work, some barriers that don't work in there. The fact that these agents came out from the place where they are supposed to stay. So a lot of, but there was not a mediatic fix. And so this just to tell you that we try to keep it active, and it is active because of this type. So right now, this types of events went down. So this year we had up to now one. Okay, so here I'm a little bit proud of these data because these are the data of our laboratory during the COVID-19 crisis. But I know that the scale is not very nice, but it's showing just that that in March, this is March and April 2020. These are the following months. So it means that before the second wave of epidemics during the COVID crisis, by having a lab in place, but plus a lot of management tools and a task force dedicated, our personnel, from May to October, there were no people having COVID-19 in our the entire province of Milan, because we were, so we demonstrated that in a lower scale, between the labs at the time of COVID, we suppose we are able to give a response in real time, like in 4 hours or during the whole day, like you go there, do the swap, and you do it, if you have it or not, you can track in real time like the spread of the virus. So we understood quickly this, and we had a zero contagion, and this is instead of the percentage of population around us in the region, and we were completely zero. So it means that if we had the next pandemic, we are having thousands, hundreds of labs, so that the population can be possible. It's a high cost, but because we were managing numbers that were easier to manage. We had 15,000 potential customers, because I was serving the entire like those services that are not closing if you have a lockdown. No, io per via no. No, io questo è vero.
11 e mezza qua
Io mi hanno del vicino. Okay. And so, okay, so you can see here, like people working doing the swaps. The point was that, in effect, the capability to track contagion, like given set of population, is going to 100% if you have real-time response. Otherwise, you can have as many responses if you want, but if you don't have the data coming from in real time, your ability to take decisions will always be delayed in time. So that was happening in general terms. I was serving police, fire brigades, sanitary service, the overall population that was sized for the capacity we have. Okay, so during that period, we did also some research, but I don't want to. But this also, we were very proud that last year, also thanks to Toro Variata, we published a paper showing that we had an idea to recycle the FFP2 and FFP3 masks that was during the period of like in 3 months, we were able to demonstrate that this was our plan B. Shortage, we were able to say, okay, let's recycle the ones that we use. We didn't have to do that, but we showed our system was able to do that. And so here is the showing the results from a specific PCR machine, which is a military, coming from military, produced by this fire. It's a company located in the US, but the very first designed machine that is able to, as you can see, detect in less than 1 hour from your sample 17 biological agents from class A. Okay, so the timing it was June 2020, and you see that the it was lost with the some practices was detected. Then so I take the opportunity to focus the next following slide to say, in your opinion, if fire brigades have a detection machine that is saying a machine cell fraction is detected, what is this response? What's the validity of this response for you? That's not impressive because we're fire brigades and we're giving a response in the biological agent, so it's potentially anthrax is not really going through epidemics. Really, it's very problem 100% like this for me, but still.
As you said, after the election, maybe there should be more roles so that you can be locked in. One other analysis that but up to have, let's say, legal validity to real evidence.
Yeah, okay. So more or less, okay, correct. So let me say that you have detection. This is a detection machine, which means that basically the result is containing some uncertainty. It's not telling you what's the family of the ball is. So we say to the fact that even though to run this machine is better for you to be inside a lab, but it's still a detection machine. So the real pipeline is I detect something, I give a warning because there's something and it's a real threat. So the risk profile increase in the entire response system from on field, the people that were maybe in quarantine. So everything is changing a lot. If you say that is the problem. But the pipeline is detection, identification, and then we have confirmation. So it means that if you have a mobile laboratory, the mobile laboratory gives you identification. But confirmation usually is a real laboratory.
By this,
Yeah, not on the field, but like both. Technically speaking, because the real laboratory has more equipments and more verification systems, more experts, and so on. But also in legal terms, because in this case, if this detection machine, or even although I would pick up another sample, run into a real PCR machine and do a real identification by more sophisticated technique, still I identified it, but it's not validated. And so in terms of response, we take all the actions that are required. Say, you don't move, you go to the hospital. So we take all the measures that are appropriate in real time. And that's why, as far as brigades, we have this. Well, potentially we say because verify the safety of our operators first, because when you unfold yourself from your suite, you want to know, if you went through a real risk or if you were manipulating, and not just a quite general powder. But then, and so, yeah, so this gives me, and then this gives me the opportunity to show you, but I want, before showing you the procedure, just two consideration. Once, it's like in legal terms, you have to have people like zooprophylactic or, for instance, in Italy, the two biological labs that can also do this type of analysis are Spallanzani in Rome and Sacco in Milan. We have two reference hospitals that contains biosafety level 4 labs inside the facility of the hospital. Plus, and so we have a pipeline in the analysis. But then one way to skip part of the pipeline could be in certain cases to have the so-called reach back, which means I do an identification, and then maybe I have a video camera connected to the Sacco hospital with the experts interrogating the machine from remote, following the entire analysis and certifying remotely the analysis. So this idea of having reach back is in fact implemented in the new field of laboratories that we are doing. So basically, also the case of COVID, and we can mention it, but of course, as about 5 years later, we were doing the analysis of COVID-19 swabs, but there was a doctor from Staff Hospital doing the final recordation. So I can say this sample is positive, but then you need a doctor that will say that if this is COVID, the patient has COVID. Okay. Otherwise, as 5 years we cannot, we don't have, but now we have doctors one year or so.
Just a curiosity, what about the apartment, the
Yeah.
domination and recovery? Did you intervene or?
Well, it was not me because still it was in Verona, which is outside my domain. It's in Veneto and not in Lombardia. So I think that there has not been a real, but the apartment was empty. The lady died some years ago. The sister went into the apartment to do an inventory or clean it up. So the only person who was maybe getting in touch with Israel, but she didn't get it. She didn't touch it because it wasn't written with anthrax, and the sister knew it was not a good thing. And she called us from the very beginning with the problem was in our bank and sending it to our house in Venice. So the reality was not a real intervention. While the other interventions that we do, like if you go, the one in the stock exchange, that would stop one entire sector of offices, all the ones this envelope went through and stopping quarantine all the people for hours. And another case was in a postal office, not postal office, big in this office, distribution system. Yeah, distribution system for the Milan area. So a huge building where a lot of petrols come and you get, and so this envelope went through the entire cycle. In that building were working 300 people. We put the 300 doctors were working on shift, over 100. Keep them for a few hours waiting for this response. So what we do generally is that we use detection to understand if we can relax the system. So if the answer is no, it's not official, but we know. Maybe we do it twice, cost another 45 minutes to do this service. Twice and no is very hard to know some more than 95%. But it's a math if you go a mistake. So we are not sending the people at home, but everything that relaxed and see. But with stabilized, with one left and it's at home and that stay at home, but it's not an issue problem. And so this pipeline, so this means that we are the actors of a coordination system, we say that the CPR, the fire brigades. But it's really the coordination of a system, of a big system, because you cannot imagine to run such a scenario just by being fire brigades, even if you are equipped with mobile labs. So I made this scheme.
Indication.
Yeah.
Lei data about the degree of accuracy. Now, as they talks mostly very strong.
Well, the machines, this machine has a very high confidence level. And most all of the machines that we use are very high confidence. That's why I said more than 95%. It is something that is ranging from 95 to 99. But for instance, I have in mind a machine that we have a detection system for asbestos. And, which in fact now is not anymore productive by company that was using it. But I had a mistake that was about 10%. A certain point, 10% is an issue. So I was reading some papers from France where colleagues were using that machine and basically they said you can pick up a little piece of a rooftop and I think that this is bad. And they do what first run with this infrared machine. And it's telling me it is not. You be sure that it is not. If you say it is, it's the false negatives that I'm worried about. It's telling you no, but instead it's yes. And so the idea was that we could pick up 3 different samples, possibly with different morphologies. So you go one with another one with a pattern, another one. And so this different, the way it was originated the sample. And you run through 3 different screens. And then each one of those, you run throughout 3 other, each of them 3 times, that the error of 10% was really 1, which is the standard. So usually these machines have very high probability to detect no false positive, no false negatives, with the assumption that the detection is simply considered also was not correct. So if you don't lose problem, you sure or you manipulate and get the sample when the machine that is exactly as required by the instruction that they need.
I feel about what trade to use right now.
Or forensic. What? But the forensic is not our main field. We do it as I was telling you for fire recognition. But in general terms, the forensic part is not the domain of probability of no one. Because if we don't have that domain, that's no other part of the pipeline that is so specialized in what
But also to manage this aspect, this instrument should be calibrated. I don't know if it exists an anthrax standard, I don't know.
No, not really. This is why in the premise I did this military machine. It's built in such a way that the detection is in the same thing considered easy. It's 4 steps, you get it with your high pressure. You need potential powder in a reagent, it goes into a picture, push up the button, and it's wild. So there's not so much expertise to learn but in reality, knowledge of the field. But if we look at the physical pressure, you don't have to have the hands of a guy that works like that. And if you go through the second phase and say, I want to pick up the same sample and go through a PCR machine, then the operation becomes much like complex. And so that guy, that analytic guy, has to be more skilled than the one used in this military one. So for instance, when I did this, so you can see these are fire brigades and this is the doctor. To have the permission to do this operation, I brought the laboratory before the first case in Italy was revealed to the hospital Sacco. I put the laboratory in their parking spot. I called the director general of the hospital and I told him, come inside and look at this pipeline. And telling me it is different from the pipeline, but the guys are doing their best. And immediately certified. I got prepared for that. In January 2020, I bought the same technology that Sacco was using. And I asked the head of the lab of the Sacco, what is your pipeline? If you have for it. I brought this exact same type of pipeline. And I ran hundreds of intercomparisons. So I took it, my technicians were able to do the same procedure. We were putting samples of 300 duplicated, we were running, we were comparing, bringing the same results. So it's tough, but not impossible. It's instead an easy elaboration that one of doing the topic samples compared with many other more complex things. So at this point, let me come back to the fact that I did this diagram just to underline the fact that if you have a real CBRN operation with a certain impact on the building, these 20 lines represents the operations that you have to do. There are many, but it goes from zoning to a typical operation that the firefighters do, that is rescue. So you have to have a lot of capacity, you have to have a lot of knowledge, you have to have a lot of training. But as you can see, we coordinated the entire system, but not the primary actions are in charge of us. So if you have biological agents hitting a labs and you did a biological agent and swing out of the lab and you can find another people around that lab, these are the actions for which we are in charge, while many others are coordinated by us, but are not run by us. So that reminds how complex and how many operations required to have a CBRN scenario. And so once I was underlining, I don't know, technical rescue, who is the fire brigades? Okay, then what do you have to, what do you need to have in order to do that? These types of equipments and where in which vehicle will be contained. So this is the initial phase of design that we did on new vehicle vehicles. I will show you some rendering later on to understand where we put the equipment on a vehicle such that we don't leave anything at all during the mission. So there are CBRN operations, there are medical operations, there are security, if you want, operations, and there are general operations that are in support of the mission. If you are not at home, you're bringing a level outside your country, you have to be sure that you can be self-sustainable, and so that's why I wasn't provided. So coming back to this scenario, if we are designing now a new procedure, and the new procedure is how to manage anthrax potentially contained in an envelope, I have to remind you that first of all we ask ourselves, okay, but how does this scenario start? It starts with a powder. So we say that a powder is an envelope that is enough to claim that we have a biological scenario. The answer is yes, meaning that we know that people from 2001 replicated a reference scenario, even though they were not really using a real agent. Okay? But then we cannot exclude that in that envelope there are other types of risk. So is that powder, I don't know, in reality a chemical substance? this happened once in a reverse way. The agency of the customer agency was stopping an envelope. The envelope was containing a white powder. What is for them a white powder? For the customers, from the customer's agency, white powder. Okay, right. So I always wondered if they find the two like this, but the Senate was talking or not. Then because then it came out to be powder of thorium of dye, so radioactive substance. So just to say, this example, we'll bring it back to our example. I have an envelope with a white powder. I have to exclude first the other release. So I consider it as a biological intervention. I pick up all the measures. What I have to do is be sure that there's no explosive, meaning that there may be some trigger the system in such a way that the powder can. In reality, you don't use explosives with biological agents. Why?
Then we can affect by
Temperature.
Yeah, so energy and some other. And the other, in fact, if you think the attack in 2001 was they manipulated anthrax in order to be more diffuse in air, like with the Van der Waals founding, were modified in such a way that if you were opening it, normally it would be something like this, while if you were opening that, it was something like this. So really hitting the person. But you have to exclude that there's some explosive mechanism, that there's some chemicals spilling out, that it could be radioactive. So before going into that detection of biological agents, you have to exclude other potential risks, which in general for us is pretty much easy for this two, but a little bit more complex with this. Explosives, you have to ask for the intervention of post-war which is not obviously a consequence of particles. So I'm not gonna go through like the detailed explanation of this diagram, but just observe that when an event like this, like powder in an envelope for a stage building or place is alarm displayed, is the activation system of actors that are going to be involved in this. Just want to underline that we will focus a little bit on the previous question. So you see that in our response system, we have at least 2 labs and a sanitary agency intervene on top of what we do as confirmation. Identification and confirmation of the threat. But of course, we have also a lot of this is us, but we have also a lot of police. So sanitary system and police, bomb squad, forensic. Okay. And why is that? Because if you think about in physical terms, we have three elements. The message, sorry, and the powder. The message and then the envelope can contain themselves forensic evidence. It should be footprints in the envelope, the contents and footprint on the message. And so this, and then we have the powder. Of course, we should do some forensic later on also on the powder, but also you know if you have the footprints or something like that, the message, right? So this is pretty much a tricky problem because it means that if I have explosives, maybe combined to biological, the box will tell me, I want to detonate. My guys will tell me, no, I would like to pick up a sample to check detection. And then the scientific police will tell me, no, I would like to preserve the message inside. So it means that if we follow the doctrine of one of the three entities involved, we destroy what's important for the others. So it is evident then that this procedure has to be an optimum. And so it should be very slow down in time because you try to preserve the message, the envelope, and the powder. So the entire procedure, I'm not going to go through it, but it's just showing it. Key in the first action is to know if the envelope was opened or not. Let's try to say some things, like if it was open, then what it means, or if it was not open, what does it mean? What's the difference for you, like having it opened or having it closed?
Consider the contamination.
Contamination of people, of environment, okay. People were exposed and the environment was exposed. But on the other hand, it was open.
If explosive risk
Yeah.
is lower because
Yeah. It
or
was,
doesn't work or
yeah, and so there's no problem explosive risk, or you know if there was, because it's a level. Someone was looking inside. So that like if it was open, you have a lot of information about it. It starts with a better defined procedure on how to act, but it starts from a level of risk which is higher than in the case closed. And of course, if it was closed, it's very tricky to understand it because there's something inside. You have to have X-rays, you have to have some other stuff. So I don't want to go through the fire brigades procedure, bombs plus procedure, but just to emphasize, which is long, but just to emphasize that then, as you can see here, we usually divide the contents of the envelope in 1 up to 4 samples. So in the best case, one sample is for us with our detection machine, and the other one is for zoophilitic laboratory. In the worst case, we do an intercomparison also with Stacco. So if we think that people are exposed, we do also the opposite. If we don't think that people are exposed, we just do the one checking the heat from an environmental lab. And then we keep at least one other sample as a backup. So in regulatory terms. So this is just to simplify our logistics. It means that we have samples traveling from one lab to the other, time, procedures in the laboratories, if vivo or so on are longer. So coming out to giving a potential pre-alarm is given by us, okay? But the final alarm or the final certification, like in the case of I explained before, it implies that we did detection, it was positive. The Prophylactic Institute close to Milan did, and it was positive, and then by law we had to send it to Foggia to have the third examination. So coming to Foggia to be 16 hours, but then was doing it the following days, a few days when up to the fact that it was possible to declare officially and give to the media the fact that that was relevant. For then, saying something to the media with the Twitter text. Okay, so I gave you an example of a procedure that I think this final part of the lecture, if I'm able to finish it or fine, otherwise I will leave you the slides, is showing you like some of the thoughts that we did designing a new fleet of vehicles. So this is the new capacity that we are designing now. We are designing this capacity for our organization in a new configuration, let's say, implemented by regulations of the civil protection system in Europe. So this fleet will promptly reply to a CPRM event, and you see we have a big detection, sampling, and monitoring vehicle. This is going to be the mom of the fleet because it also integrates the advanced command post. So this both a control room and where the people, this goes in from orange to yellow zone. And while these other guys, no, these four guys here, so this is logistic. Then we have a deco and sunny vehicle, but then we have 4 labs. So these 4 labs are 40 feet. These 2, while these are 220 that they connect shards. So we have 3 feet are okay. And so, how did we decide to design these new labs, like big labs, if you want? Well, we built up a prototype, an existing prototype during the COVID-19 crisis. We knew that civil protection system in Europe was thinking about new capacities. So we basically this truck before being read and having a laboratory inside was a postal office. A postal office going into those areas where there's no service. Either after an earthquake or being areas where coverage or opening up a new office is difficult. And so we restarted it with few money and we started doing some experiment, meaning designing it, thinking about what was going to be next, which was then these new filter vehicles. Yeah.
So you can design the laboratory as you wish, but I think that you have to use it. You have to take some certifications. I know.
But the problem of certifications maybe comes here. Like if you want to design a laboratory, you can pick up this, for instance, 4 choices. It can be a perfect box with a door somewhere. It can be as the one I showed you before, so like an ISO 20, small but with expandable. It can be 2 of them interconnected if you want to have more space. Because the point here, this volume is not that much. So or I can do expandable, or I connect pieces, or I enlarge the piece, or eventually the one we saw here is long and expandable. So it's the biggest volume today. And now here comes your question. Does it make any difference in giving a certification? Right, that's what you're asking. So what could be the complexity between this and this? What's the difference in terms of certification? Well, first of all, what is the safety driver of a lab? Which is the most important safety feature that you have to have in a biological lab?
It's nothing wrong.
Pressure. You have to be sure that the positive pressure is maintained, or negative actually. In our case, it's negative. So, now we have to explore what do you mean by certifying the system. Here it's a gray area. But still, let's talk about performance before talking about certification. So, if it has to have a high performance, it's easier to have it here than here. Why? Because the volume is smaller. Eventually, you increase the size of your system as providing overpressure. But even if you have an extra volume, you can have also an extra system. So obviously the connection, the mechanical connection, because in this perimeter, where there's some object flowing into another object with expansion, you have to be sure that the expansion is perfectly displayed like that. So performing and not, giving a flow to the pressurization system. So that's why we opted not to have this configuration, but also it's costly. In this equation, there are also costs. Bigger, the more complex, obviously. But the idea was that these maintaining the efficiency of an expandable thinker is tough. Connecting to objects and maintaining efficiency after the connection is also tough. Having one big volume, the only problem is simpler. Eventually, as we were saying, here I have a bigger, technical room because I have a bigger volume, and so maintaining the fraction in a bigger volume requires. Then that's a debate on my side, but I don't know what field is in, because finding the certification of a mobile level visualization system, if you tell me what the reference is, I would be very happy. So right now, I didn't find any, like I can study calculate an analogy with laboratories in buildings where there is like a clear certification of that systems, but we can translating it somehow in the mobile level. If I do translate it perfectly, I will have this part of the volume entirely occupied by the visualization system. Because if I put in a mobile level the visualization system and you design it in a structure like a building, it's too big. Too heavy and so on. So this is a big of a discussion in my team, and so my team for the biological laboratory opted by not certifying the entire chapter. And we certify the glove box, which is the real manipulation system where we put the instrument. And then we build up the procedures such that you are sure that what is getting out of the glove box is neutralized, the capacity, or you have the proper degree.
So based on the structure and the type of mobile lab, you can have some different processes to use the lab. I thought that every mobile lab is the same, and you can do the same.
No. So let me. I won't finish my discussion, but it tries to answer to your right question. So I was saying, but one of the reference document is this WHO guideline, which is telling you something very basic, which is like the more complex the operations you want to have in your mobile laboratory biological lab, the bigger would be the volumes of equipment you bring with yourself, which doesn't necessarily mean that your mobile lab is bigger, but it's obviously practically the same. So it's telling you need more equipment because you do more operations, potentially on the field. And so this is one point that someone thought that made some thought about this story of the equipment. But now I don't want to tell you the difficulties to design a biological laboratory having this list of potential agents for the European Commission is giving us. You have to be ready to detect and identify all these agents. So it's a little bit tricky, but for instance, it responds to one principle criteria. It's like your glove box has to be by a safety level. Then potentially, for each one of those, we thought what are the procedures. So what is the manipulation afterward? And we designed the space knowing that you have procedures and you have technologies. So this is the very complex scheme that we were following. I mean, this was done for every vehicle, not just for the labs, but it was done a verification of, once you have the vehicle, what are the equipments, what are the actions that you have to do on missions, and then redo it for every scenario. So here are all the scenarios, and then scenario by scenario, you verify that your box, like your lab, and your scenario number 1, scenario number 2, scenario number 3. And you look at the procedure, and you look at if that's space enough, and if the equipment are here, but like that. And so this came out like for defining first a general set of equipments you might want to have in your lab. But then you have to go for each one throughout a choice. So like, how do I manipulate my substances? In a very high safety glove box, under a hood with a recycled air or a hood with a filter. So every time you do manipulation, you have to think, what are you manipulating? It's a class A agent. Class A agent, you cannot use this, you cannot use this unless you neutralize the agent's amount. And so just to answer to your question, given that we are designing, for instance, this system, we are designing 3 labs, chemical, biological, radiological. Is this system the same for all of them? No.
But I mean, there are some glove boxes that can.
For sure. You have what is mandatory is you have to have the first line of protection. The first barrier is to have a glove box. So because for a very simple reason, no matter what you're manipulating, you are never in the, I mean, in our job, in the situation where you know perfectly what you are manipulating. So first we start from saying this is the most dangerous substance, and so you have to have a glove box. But then if I order 3 different, I didn't come out ordering 3 identical glove boxes for the chemical, for the biological, and for the radiological. So very simple example. If you have a biological, we are interconnecting the biological with an autoclave. So it's something that is maybe neutralizing immediately, like some box opens up, sample goes out, and you have your, neutralization of the biological. If you are manipulating a chemical, you could have more than the release of it when you manipulate, because you manipulate very. But it doesn't mean to be small, because you can have a big explosion even with a few grams. But the problem is that the base here has to be resistant to corrosion, to chemical attacks. So we change the base of the glove box. If you manipulate radioactive substances, maybe this material is not good enough. Maybe you want to shield the lowest part, okay, to have some protection to the radiation from operating. So this is just a system. So this is just an example. It's just a subsystem, but then obviously the final result of designing this lamp, which is a biological mobile lamp, would be very different from this screen. Not very different, but there are a lot of differences from this screen, which is. So I just concluded the lecture showing us some rendering 3D of some of the new fleet that we are designing. That includes also thinking about the mobilization. And that's it. And thank you very much. If you have any questions, visit my email. Andiamo a chiudere la connessione.
Allora,